You got to be very careful about who you're trusting and what they're doing. And, they don't care about your employees. They care about the shareholders, especially if you're with a huge company, and that's what they're supposed to care about. So you have to understand who you're doing business with. And if you're in business with a massive corporation that is required to maximize shareholder profit, they definitely do not have the best interest of your company and your employees in mind.
Are you sick and tired of the high costs and inefficiency plaguing our U.S. healthcare system? Do you feel like you're navigating a maze when dealing with insurance companies, only to end up paying a fortune for basic medical services? Then this Broken Healthcare podcast is for you. So get ready to take control of your healthcare. Here's your host, Ray Kober.
And we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Broken Healthcare. My name is Ray Kober. I am your host, and I am thrilled to be joined today by Julie Selesnick of Berger Montague. I have that right, Julie?
You do, 100%.
And
Thanks,
so Julie is an attorney that specializes in ERISA law and helping organizations cope with all of the changes and dynamics going on with the CAA, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which we're going to talk about. And it's a very interesting time in healthcare. We are recording this podcast in late December, mid-December, December 17th, 2024. We had some crazy stuff happen recently in the news. The CEO of United Healthcare was gunned down on a city street in Manhattan. We still are trying to put the pieces together there. We don't know if this was a random act of violence or if this was premeditated. It certainly looks like it was premeditated, but in terms of what was behind it, there are a lot of questions that remain unanswered there. We have a new incoming administration, and whether you are blue or red or what your political affiliation is, change is a-coming.
Just in the air.
For sure. And with healthcare, nearing $5 trillion in spend, which means 20 cents of every dollar practically is spent on healthcare. I would think that, regardless of your political affiliation, you'd have to agree that we are at a precipice. We are at a breaking point. We are at a time for change. And Julie and I kind of run in the same circuits and seminars, and I ran into her at Rosetta Fest this past September, along with a star-studded, crop of panelists and guest speakers. And Julie was one of those folks, and she was kind enough to grace us today with her presence and give us a little insight as to what's going on. Because as an employer now, trying to navigate the space, we know, for example, that for years and years, there were hard rules in place if you have a 401k plan out there for your employees. And there were kind of guardrails about rules, what you could do, what you couldn't do. And as an employer, you need to know how to protect yourself and maybe even more importantly, do the right thing by your people, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. And now with the passage of the CAA, those rules are now bleeding into healthcare. And so Julie is an expert in this subject area. Why don't you start? Let's start at the beginning, Julia. And I'm sorry, I know it's Julie. Does anyone call you Julia?
I know.
I don't know why I have Julia in my brain. Sorry.
That's okay. No, it's fine.
I might say it six more
like
times. But
go ahead. You can call me.
Just correct
Call
me and
whatever,
say, Ray, it's Julie.
Or I'll just go by Julia. That'll be fine too.
How'd you get started in this racket of law?
A long time ago in a land far, far away, I graduated from law school and I came out as a defense attorney. And that is sort of what's funny to me now when I look back that I spent the first half of my career defending insurance companies, not health insurance companies, but insurance companies in insurance coverage disputes. So really, I focus, if you think ERISA is dry, I used to focus on toxic torts and pollution and sort of it would be a fight over who pays for this when a company sort of, messes up the ground and they had insurance coverage, but they definitely did what they did on purpose. Who's responsible? So I would represent the insurance company that would, come in there like a responsible party and say, oh, we're not going to pay for your intentional bad behavior. That would be against public policy because they don't want to pay. And then the company would say, well, this is the whole reason we bought your insurance is so that we could behave poorly and you'd pay for it. So it was like one of those careers where you could not have sympathy for either side a lot of the time, and
Right,
it was
right.
just very transactional, but I never felt most of my cases, there was not a huge human element that was there. So now fast forward to 2009
No, well,
and
wait a second. So you're telling me that you sat across the table from Julia Roberts? I mean, Erin Brockovich?
no, because I sat across the table from the company that Julia Roberts would go after as Erin Brockovich. And that company would say, oh, we've done a bad thing and we've given a bunch of people a disease because we put stuff in the drinking water. And we'd say, you're horrible people. We agree with them. You should pay them, but we're not going to pay for that. You shouldn't have done that. That's not covered under your policy. So I was a bad guy, but I was a bad guy telling other bad guys no. And so I felt more detached from the system than it
Mm,
feels in healthcare because I was a layer removed from any individual. It was really mostly about like who's going to clean up this dirty groundwater without thinking about, and at least at that point in time, I wouldn't think about like, oh gosh, I'm trying to help this one company get off the hook, and meanwhile, all these people might be drinking dirty water, or maybe there's going to be like a daycare center put on top of it or something. But I knew that I was not fulfilled by it. I liked my coworkers. I liked the work, the sort of intellectual part of it, but I
sure.
didn't like what I was doing.
You had a
And
job to do. Your job was to represent the insurance carrier?
the carrier, and I represented what used to be one of the largest carriers in this country until they tanked the global economy in 2008. All I know, so you remember AIG, they're part of
Of
the sort of,
course.
yeah, so
$800 billion under management
yeah,
assets. I remember
yeah.
the commercials.
So they
Right.
were the company whose insurance companies I used to represent. They were like my main client. And I remember I was on maternity leave in 2008, and all of a sudden the economy collapses. And my boss is like, calls me and says, I'm not sure our doors open Monday. It depends if AIG gets bailed out. If they don't, we're done because we have all these outstanding receivables. So I'm like, oh, this is wonderful timing. This is perfect.
What a crazy time in our lives, right? I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time is The Big Short,
I love
and
that
just
movie.
incredible movie, and just seeing that stuff going down in real time. Like now we have the benefit of hindsight, right? We could look back and say, wow, we made it out of that one. It didn't have to turn out that way. Like we were
Mm,
really at a tipping point. And if the government didn't come in and do
yeah.
what I mean, I guess there are two schools of thought. Some people still believe the government shouldn't have bailed us out, but I'd hate to think about that scenario.
The large scale suffering that would have gone on in the population without the bailout, I would not have wanted to see that. I
Yeah,
think that, some of the bankers maybe didn't deserve the cushy bailout they got, and there probably needed to be more criminal penalties associated with the behaviors involved.
for sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
now I'm
yeah.
back at work, right? And I represent this insurance company that changes its name. And I am running around the country going into court, filing motions saying it would be really prejudicial to call my client by their name because people don't like them. Can you call them, asking judges, make the other side call them Chartist now because
Oh
you
God.
can't call them AIG. So I started to feel like really unhappy, as you can imagine. And
Right.
over the next year, I was having like this existential, like, what am I doing? I've got to not do this anymore. And so then I had like a 6 week jury trial. I've got like a 2-year-old. I have a 6 week jury trial out in San Francisco. And that was it. After that, I quit. And I was like, I'm not even going to be a lawyer at all. I hate being a lawyer, is what I decided. That happens periodically. Find me a lawyer that didn't at one time hate being a lawyer. It's hard
Right.
and it's not
Right.
always fun. So I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so I then sort of took a couple of years and veered into, I opened an online vape store. I quit smoking during this trial in San Francisco because I was flying back and forth, and vape pens became a thing for the first time. And
Right.
so somehow, after smoking Newports for like 25 years, I quit smoking during this trial. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I was just buying them for to get me through the flights and the airports, but I quit. And so I ended up opening like this online vape store where I had these organic vape liquids that were made in a factory here in North Carolina that I could go to and see what they were putting in it. And I helped like 32 people that I went to high school with quit smoking. That's what I did for like the next year and a half, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I made like $10. I helped a bunch of people quit smoking. I felt super good. I'm like, I just helped more people than I probably ever helped as a lawyer so far put together. And then,
Well, wait a
so
second. I didn't know that vaping could help you quit smoking. Is that a thing?
absolutely. You can
Huh.
step down your nicotine level. So no one's addicted to tobacco. It's the nicotine. You need like a hit of nicotine every so often, or else you're gonna get cranky. And
Right.
so
I've
the
been
way it
around people who've been cranky trying to stop smoking. It's never any
oh
fun.
I know my own mother once was like, maybe you just need a cigarette. And I was like, oh my
Mm,
God, I am an evil
please smoke.
person.
Please burn. Yes.
Yeah.
We've all been
So
there.
yeah, but with the vape stuff, you can buy the liquids or you can get the liquids in different concentrations of nicotine. So you can start at a high dosage and taper down. And so by
Oh,
the end, so it took me like 6 full months to be all the way off the sauce. But I went from smoking like a pack and a half of Newport 100s a day, which is so disgusting, to like, after 6 months, I just needed like the lowest dose, like a 0.03 nicotine, just like one drag of a vape pen. And then it
yeah.
started to make me feel sick. And then I started to turn into an ex-smoker who was like, do you smell smoke? And before I knew it, I had quit and I helped a bunch of other people quit. Then they, several of them stayed quit, probably not all of them, but by far, I have tried everything to quit smoking over
That's amazing. Well, so did you read Matthew Perry's biography?
I
I
did.
listened to it on Audible, and he
Mm-hmm.
said by far quitting smoking was the hardest thing he ever had to do in his life. He said, like his addiction to smack was nothing in comparison to his addiction to nicotine. When they told him he had to stop smoking, he just basically said, that's it for me. And
I
poor
still
guy,
feel
may he rest
sad
in
about
peace.
it. I
It's
know.
it's horrible. Like,
I know.
when you're on a popular sitcom like that and you're a TV addict like I am, you feel like you lost a family member, and it's not even like I was super addicted to Friends, but anytime I watched it, you couldn't help but chuckle
And
and laugh.
Chandler was the best character on Friends, the funniest, and
And
he was my favorite.
and you learn from the book, like he was made to play that role. They tried other actors out for that role, but he was made to play
Yeah.
that role. But it sucks me back to that because I recall distinctly, and my middle brother had a pretty heavy addiction to smoking. He's a rock drummer. He was always in clubs, surrounded by smoke, and it's not like it is today, kids. Like if you went out to a bar, a
Yeah.
club, or a restaurant, you were shrouded in a fog of smoke. So the secondhand stuff was there. And if you were trying to quit and you were in that environment, it was like next to impossible. But he quit
Absolutely.
many years ago and he agreed. Like I told him about the Chandler story. And he was like, yeah. And I have another buddy who also struggled with addiction. And he said, by far, quitting smoking was way harder than quitting any other addiction that I had. And it's just so that's cool. Like you taught me something today. That's very interesting.
Oh,
And
yeah, I was so into the vaping community for a minute. I was like, "Oh, people are really, like, missing the boat here about this is, like, a way to quit smoking." And I started, like, writing for vape magazines and Spinfuel about, like, why it was so stupid that public policy wasn't sort of embracing vaping as a method of quitting smoking. And meanwhile, the UK was doing all these studies that were showing that if you have, like, safe vape stuff, it's, like, 97% safer than smoking a cigarette.
wow.
And if the point is to wean off, then I thought it was great. Now I see, of course, like everything else, we took it and ruined it. We're like, you get Jewel who comes out and they're like, let's make it twice as strong and pump it full of poison and do whatever. But at the time, I was like, this is amazing. And I want to tell everybody. And I was really into it. And then,
So you
and
made
then
$10, but you helped a bunch of people, and that was very gratifying. And then what happened?
So then this kid had a vape pen in his pocket and exploded and like paralyzed his vocal cords or something. And all these people started dying from vape juice. And like I would say there was a tipping point where
Mm.
people were like, I didn't think that my online career was going to really work for much longer. My son was like, I like to eat 3 meals a day, and it was like, it was getting more difficult to provide doing this. So I was like, all right, I should probably go back to being a lawyer, but a different type of lawyer. And so let's try something different. I was going to try plaintiff side and just let's try something else. So I was really lucky. And I ended up sort of as a temp in a group at a firm in DC that's a plaintiff side law firm. And I was in the ERISA group. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, ERISA, Jesus, I, I was very intentional not to ever take this in law school. I definitely don't want to learn this. But when I
Right.
got there, I liked what they were doing. And I'm like, all right, this is interesting. And of course, they sort of tricked me because they were doing like the one interesting thing in 401ks that they could have done. But I liked it. And so I sort of was just decided, okay, maybe this is a good thing for me. And I did like doing class actions on behalf of a bunch of individuals and people that were getting screwed over by something. So that really appealed to me. And then when I learned that ERISA covered health benefit plans, I've always been interested in healthcare and in health insurance. And I have an insurance background, as we discussed. So I'm like, oh, I could maybe I could be useful here. So starting around like 2015, I was like, I'm gonna really focus on healthcare. And it was great timing. So the person who was in charge of my group, her name's Karen Handorf. She just recently retired, but she also liked healthcare. And so we started looking at it, and we were a little bit ahead of sort of where the curve was on certain things, and no one was really trying to listen to us at that time. But we were writing articles like, hey, you have a duty to monitor these service providers in your health plan, and you're going to get sued if you don't start doing it. The 401k world is drying up, and there's not a lot left to fix there. And there's going to be plaintiffs attorneys looking at this, and what a mess. As soon as you sort of open the hood and look under it, you're like, oh my God, what is going on in here?
Right.
And there's nothing I can think of in American society that exists with such excess, fraud, waste, abuse, rampant lawlessness, just unbelievably. You wouldn't like let your kids go there at night if it was a place, the healthcare industry, because it's so seedy. And I was just like, I can't
Julie,
believe
maybe you
this.
didn't hear, but the name of this show is Broken Healthcare.
Yeah. And that was it. I was like a true believer. And then next thing you know, CAA passes, and I somehow am like one of 5 lawyers in the country that are like, this is interesting.
So
I don't
take
know
us
why.
back just a step and give us kind of the premise behind an employer's responsibility under ERISA when managing plan assets of a 401k, and then how it just a little snapshot of kind of a segue then into how it because what I'm hearing from you is for a while, attorneys, law firms were banking on the fact that employers out there were not fulfilling their duty to their employees. And that was fertile ground for them to go out there and spark up a lawsuit. And now I'm hearing that the same thing is applying to healthcare. So if you would just kind of give us a little snapshot for employers that might be listening in, CFOs and folks, with P&L responsibility. What was the idea behind it with 401k, and now how does it apply to them as far as healthcare is concerned?
That's a great question. So starting in probably, I guess, the late 80s, early 90s, there was a growing realization that, maybe there are sort of some excess fees being taken out of sort of people's individual 401k accounts because there's no disclosure of what you're being required to pay. And when there's no disclosure, there's always going to be funny business. When things are opaque, it's usually not because there are good things happening behind the scenes. So some laws get passed, so now ERISA is this big federal statute that is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. And it was passed to help protect employee benefits. And so any employee benefit plan where employees have skin in the game because some of their money is going into it too. The employer is a fiduciary when they take the money out of the account. That means that you're in a position of trust. Someone's trusting you to hold the money and do the right thing with it. And so this is a really high responsibility. And so starting about 20, 25 years ago with 401ks, we're like, we don't think that, lawmakers started to realize that they might not be taking their duties seriously enough and that they weren't really paying attention as to what was going on in the plan. So it's not that employers were actually actively, in most cases, doing something wrong themselves. They just weren't monitoring the people they were hiring to manage the assets that they had of their employees under management in their 401k plan or in their pension plan. So these laws start being passed, and then they get incorporated into ERISA, and enforcement begins. And next thing you know, $500 billion later, we're like, wow, basically things that it used to cost like, I don't know, 500 basis points or some stupid amount to invest in someone's fund. And now it's like 50 basis points. And someone told me a statistic. I wish I could remember it, but for like each $10 million of settlement, like you come down like 10 basis points or something. And really, here we are now, and things are largely cleaned up in the 401k area because of what started with sort of increased enforcement and led into increased class action litigation. So it's not often that people are like, oh, litigation's wonderful. But here it really did help where the state sort of ended. The government can't fix everything, and they shouldn't fix everything. And they don't even have the ability to even in many cases get involved in a lot of things. So this was an area where the statute could be used to pick up the slack, and you could have actual employees whose money was being wasted, help be sort of citizen attorney generals and bring cases, and law firms sort of knew the issues to look for, and you could find the people you needed. It became a sort of cottage industry for a lot of plaintiffs attorneys, but plaintiffs class action ERISA attorneys. So sort of a serious brand of attorney, because you're not, putting up a billboard or anything like that. You're getting your fees approved by the court at the end. And when you bring cases under ERISA, you're not even seeking money damages. It's an equitable statute. What you're seeking is fix this problem. And sometimes the fix means that money needs to be removed from the person who wrongly took it and returned to the people who it was taken from. But it isn't about the money. It's about restoring the status quo, putting things back the way they were.
But
So
at the end of the day, Julie, isn't it always about the money?
well, yeah, I mean,
I mean,
certainly.
I understand exactly what you're saying, but these law firms who bring these suits, they make bank, no?
Well, they make bank sometimes, and sometimes they make nothing. It just depends how the wind is blowing. But there was certainly a heyday with the 401k cases where some firms were making a ton of money, especially if they were filing 40, 50 of these excessive fee cases. So it became sort of cookie cutter. Right now, it's
Mm,
certainly cookie cutter where this is the issue. It's a race to sue every single company out there. And it was another sort of perfect storm for this was you could have a retiree as your plaintiff because they're still invested in the plan and they're not worried they're going to lose their job, so they're more than happy to sue their former employer. So it was sort of a perfect storm of lots of government encouragement. And, you could rely on the DOL to probably be on your side if you were going after an excessive fee. The courts were very ERISA friendly in the 401k space, understanding that there was sort of an issue with excessive fees. And it just turned into a real sort of, it did certainly, a lot of plaintiffs firms did very well during that time, but also hundreds of millions of dollars were restored to plans and plan participants, retirement accounts were saved, and
sure.
everyone was happier at the end. It ended up being sort of, I would say, a net bonus for society. And this is how the law should work when it
Right.
works well.
So what
It
I'm hearing though is so that by and large, where 401ks are concerned, that kind of pond was cleaned up pretty well. And so now the fertile ground, the new hunting ground is now health plans. And so what does an employer need to be aware of? What are their duties and responsibilities? And is there such a thing as kind of safe harbor? If they have a fully insured plan, does that indemnify them of this? Or if they are in a self-funded plan and an ASO arrangement where the insurance carrier is managing the administration of the plan, is that a safe harbor? What do you say?
So the last example is probably the least safe place to be is in a ASO managed by a major insurance carrier.
Oh,
That's
do
well,
tell, Julie.
oh yeah. And that's right. That's what the three
Yeah.
lawsuits that have been filed so far, all of them are. So being in a fully insured plan is safer than being in a self-funded plan. It's also more expensive and less, you still are, you can never not be a fiduciary. So this is something that all employers should have to understand off the top of from the top. You're always going to be a fiduciary to your health plan. No matter what you try and do, there's no way to 100% eliminate risk. And that's because no matter who you hire and how much of it you outsource, you still have a duty to supervise them and to make sure that they're doing it properly and not wasting your employees' assets. So that is sort of the first myth that we get a lot, are people are just like, well, I just don't have to worry about this. I have all these people in place and I have people that are responsible for this. Well, no, they're not. And in fact, they devote a lot of time to writing contracts to eliminate as much responsibility for themselves as they can. And that's not always a savior, but it does limit liability for your vendors. And you got to be very careful about who you're trusting and what they're doing. And they don't care about your employees. They care about the shareholders, especially if you're with a huge company, and that's what they're supposed to care about. So you have to understand who you're doing business with. And if you're
Mm.
in business with a massive corporation that is required to maximize shareholder profit, they definitely do not have the best interest of your company and your employees in mind. That's why you have to have the best interest of your employees and your company.
We could be talking about an insurance carrier, or we could be talking about a large privately held brokerage or a publicly held brokerage, where at the end of the day, as much as you may love your broker, the person that is the face of the brokerage that you may get along with splendidly, and I know a ton of brokers, and brokers have the gift of gab. They're usually very social creatures. They're very likable. They're funny. Go out to the game, go out to dinner, blah, blah, blah. But I think what I'm hearing is you have to inspect what you expect. And when it comes to your health plan, those folks that are the face of the brokerage are almost certainly not the folks that are in the boardroom calling the shots about strategy and what's best for the shareholders of that brokerage. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And as you know, the individuals that you come across every day in healthcare, they're nice, they're funny, they have families, they're regular people. They're just like you and me. They're like,
Right,
they're just
right,
people, but
right,
they work in a system that is aimed at maximizing profit. And that is often incompatible with what you're supposed to be doing. And it's also incompatible sort of with society's goal as a whole to have affordable, high quality healthcare. So
right,
a lot of this is a self-created problem. We're like, okay, how can we create a healthcare system that, somehow provides great value, is accessible to all, is affordable, and is 100% private and, fully capitalist with zero oversight by the government. And this is what we have. And
right.
it's not great. We have to fix it. So I think it's fine if society says, we want to keep this private. We think that the market is the way to do healthcare. But if that's what we think collectively, we got to make it work. And we have not done that. We've failed miserably so far. And it's like we're failing because we're not doing things we do in every other area of the law to make sure there are guardrails in place to prevent excess. And here we're talking about a public necessity. So it would be like, imagine, I know we're way off topic and I didn't
No,
even
no,
answer
you're
the
good.
question you
This
asked,
is,
but
well, this is fascinating for me. If people are tuning out, then God bless them. But hit me, baby.
but like imagine, you go the fire, your house is on fire, and the fire department comes to your house, and they're like,
I hear Boston.
it
You
came
said
out for a second.
your house is on fire.
You know what
Get
car is.
pack the car and have it yard. And by the way, your house is on fire. Love
So
it.
imagine if the fire department was like, we need to see your fire card. And if you didn't have a fire card, they were like, we're going to call somebody else. And your house just burns while you wait, or your house just burns because you don't have any fire coverage at all. We would never allow that, right? Because that we understand is an emergency and necessary service. And I feel like people also believe that healthcare is an emergency necessary service. We make sure that children and elderly people have it. We make sure that there are things out there for people who are, really ill, that we're able to give them health coverage. So we get it. We just haven't figured out how to marry that in a way that works to a sort of for-profit private healthcare system.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not trying to be political. Whatever the answer is, this is what we're doing. This is
Yeah.
what the country has decided we're doing. So we have an obligation to try and make it work. And one of the ways to make it work, employers, whether you like it or not, you provide healthcare to 52% of the American public, 167 million people. 63% of all working age adults get their insurance through their employer or their spouse's employer.
Right.
So you guys, employers, anyone who's listening who's a CEO or in the C-suite, you're on the front lines of being able to make change here. You can actually be the disruptor and change the way this works, particularly if you act in a more collective way than you have thus far and sort of refuse to, as a group, to allow certain things that currently are rampant in the industry that you all should be aware of if you're not. But everyone sort of, no one has the power alone to stand up to, United or it's the fourth largest company in the US. And I get that. But if everyone says no, then you do have the power to do something, or
Yes,
even if a
and
critical mass.
I think what's at play here is a four-letter word that starts with F, and it's fear. Fear. And folks are fearful of breaking away from something that has been the status quo for, in the case of a company that's been around for 50 or 100 years, forever, right? And for businesses that have been around for a decade, or maybe they're in their sixth or seventh year, but they're doing the same thing, it's their comfort zone. And I have to remind myself every day that I do this for a living. I eat, I breathe, I speak this stuff. But when I talk to a prospective client or I talk to a client, they are not in the business of healthcare, nor should they be. So it really is a matter of where are they getting their guidance from, and should they feel comfortable just because it's $1 billion brokerage firm, or should they feel comfortable if they have Cigna on their ID card and Cigna is managing the administration of the plan, even though they are quote unquote in a self-funded plan. And so one thing that I think you could probably speak to that we'll touch on is, I just heard President-elect Trump talking about going after, and he said, I'm going to be very unpopular. But he's talking about going after PBMs, and specifically the PBMs that are owned by United, by Cigna, by all of the BUCAs, the big giant insurance companies. And what he said, and he is 100% correct, is that a PBM is nothing more than a middleman. They're in between the transaction. They're not manufacturing the drug. They're not delivering the drug to you. They are in between, and they're taking an inordinate amount of money. And I had the privilege of interviewing Renzo Lozati, who's the CEO of USRX Care, and they're a fiduciary PBM. And, it's funny because I have been in discussions with a group that they have over 6,000 lives on their health plan. They spend in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 million a year on their healthcare plan. And the head of HR is a wonderful guy, very, very nice guy, always gives me the time of day, very gracious. And he uses the R word, the rebate word, saying that, he gets rebates back from, his through his insurance carrier's plan. And
Yeah.
Renzo talks about rebates, and he said, you know what I call rebates? Fool's gold.
Well, yeah, it's
Yeah.
the Kohl's cash of insurance. It's like if you want to
It's
overpay now so that you can get what you shouldn't have paid back in the first place at the end, and that makes you feel good. That's what a rebate is. And it's, if it was if I had my druthers, there would be no rebates. They would just be, it would be a prohibited manner of doing sort of PBM business. There's no good reason to have a rebate. Just
no,
tell us what it's supposed to cost and charge that amount up front.
correct.
And if we did that, what we need to do really is just dumb this all down. We've made it so complicated, and it is so complicated that you're right. You're a business person. And I'm sorry, every company in America does run a health insurance company, because if you offer health benefits, you literally run a health insurance company because you are responsible for making sure that the care that your employees have access to is proper, appropriate, that they have what they're entitled to, that the plan documents match the behavior, and that you're not steering them into, some horrible sort of situation. And right
Julie, and
now,
then
can't.
there's the cost. It's typically the number 1, 2, or 3 top line item expense after payroll. And by the way, Warren Buffett, who knows a thing or two about looking at a balance sheet, called GM a healthcare company with an auto unit attached.
Yeah.
A
Well, no,
healthcare company with an auto unit attached. So
totally.
think about how much money GM spends on healthcare for Warren Buffett to opine that.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
Someone said this, and I was listening to someone a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I guess it's not that crazy, but it just like shocked me. Starbucks spends more on employee benefits than on coffee.
Coffee.
US
Yeah.
Steel more on benefits than steel. And it's like, okay, It is the second largest item after payroll, almost always the largest item after payroll.
Yeah.
And also another complicating ripple in sort of why this is so difficult for companies to deal with are, so we've got a difference of opinion of how a company should run its healthcare plan. Traditionally, health plans are run through HR. And I understand this because the health benefit is a recruiting and retention tool. But recruiting and retention have, first of all, different metrics of success than procurement, right? Recruiting and retention, the measure of success is nobody quit or we got a lot of people because they like our benefits. That has nothing to do with the bottom line or saving money. Whereas everything else that a company procures, one of at least the measures of did we do this well is did we get a good price for it? And that's not even in the picture right now when it comes to healthcare. And the sort of second part of this problem is, you know, in a more functional system, it would be the C-suite or so first, everyone should have a committee, a healthcare committee. If you have a 401k committee, you should have a health plan committee. And it's just important now, whether or not you previously had to focus this much on your health plan, you do now. Things are changing. This is the wave of the future. All of the regulatory agencies are moving their focus to health plans. All the lawyers are moving their focus to health plans. As you can see, the public is outraged at the way health insurance coverage works in America. This has to be a more important issue for 2025 on in every corporate boardroom on what are our important issues for this year. And one of them should be sort of HR is very important in this, but they also didn't go to HR school or become HR specialists to run a health plan. They certainly, many HR people never had thought they would do anything to do with health insurance. It has to be that the people in charge of procurement or whoever buys everything else for the company are involved at the beginning in helping to design and plan the benefits and purchasing what you buy for healthcare, in making vendor arrangements, in negotiating and vetting contracts. Right now, you've got the head of HR signing something that's worth like $150 million a year after lunch with the broker at your favorite place. And it's not
That's
that
not
the HR.
appropriate.
Yeah, it really isn't. And it's like
Yeah.
HR's great, but that shouldn't be their responsibility.
And we are seeing that, we're starting to see it creep into procurement and purchasing, but it's the exception, not the rule. But I think because the expense is becoming so large, the more savvy leadership teams are starting to recognize, hey, we need to do a better job here. And, these 15% year over year increases have got to go. Something somewhere's got to give.
Yeah. So now what? You've got these lawsuits against plans, and one of the lawsuits is against Wells Fargo. It's a publicly traded company. How long before a shareholder reads the lawsuit? It's like, well, what the hell? Why are they managing this so poorly? They're managing our profits poorly. They're spending them on wasteful healthcare. Now we're going
Right.
to see a shareholder derivative lawsuit. So there should be a lot of incentive for especially publicly traded companies already to realize we're not doing this well.
Mm.
We thought the system worked, but it clearly doesn't. We're spending a ton of money. It's out of control and grows 15% every year if we're lucky. And so something has to change. And the first change is, the good news is, if you lean into sort of legal compliance, which is always fun, right? Lean into legal compliance. But this is one
Woohoo!
area where if you're like, I'm going to be a good fiduciary, I'm going
That's
to
the
do it.
party I want to go to.
But if you do it, you'll save money and it will actually result in a huge savings to your plan. So it's like when we tell you, I can tell an employer all day long, you have to hire a vendor to look at your data and see if your claims are being paid properly. If you're in a self-funded plan, if you don't have an unconflicted data vendor, you need to get one. It should be on your Christmas list, and get one. And it's amazing to me still how many employers, they're okay with so normally if you're in a self-funded plan, you have a third-party administrator, a TPA, and you're renting access to the network. Sometimes all of these are the same person, usually when it's a huge insurance carrier. So you've got Cigna or United or Anthem or Aetna or some blue that's sort of administering your plan. So you're accessing their network. It feels like, even though you hired them to work for you, that you sort of work for them because you have to do what they tell you. You have to follow their rules. You are very limited in what you're able to do. So it's a really asymmetric relationship. And one of the things historically that hasn't happened, our employers haven't supervised them. And the DOL did start suing plans over this right before the passage of the CAA, which actually was some of the impetus for the CAA, because one of the responses from plans were, we can't, how are we supposed to supervise them? We can't even figure out what they're paying. They won't even give
Right.
us like the most limited amount of data. So one of the provisions of the CAA is, getting access to your data. I don't know. There's nothing more important than getting access to your data, because that's where all the answers are. If you're ever wondering why does it cost this much, it's all there. And
Right.
once you have, what you see going in are companies, a lot of times I will do consulting with a plan and they're happy with their vendors largely because they like them. And that's fine. It's fine. I get it. You like the individuals that you do business with and the people that you have relationships with. But that doesn't mean that they're not on the hook for corporate performance, just like everything else is that you do, that you contract for. So what we find is, once you have a data analytics vendor that you chose, it doesn't work for the company. So if someone says, we already do that, we do our own payment integrity, we check ourselves, that doesn't count and it doesn't satisfy your fiduciary duties under ERISA. That's like letting the fox guard the hen house sort of thing. And it's like when my son used to tell me, no, I checked my own homework, I'm perfect. It usually didn't work out like that. And so,
Ladies and gentlemen, I used to sign my own homework.
see, mom or dad, whoever's you
Bad.
could sign better.
Yeah.
So so then they find out, employers largely, what you see after just the most sort of top level review of data are that there's a lot of problems in there. Some of which, let me say charitably, are mistakes, and some of which are intentional ways of adjudicating your claim to maximize profit that middleman is going to get. And so you call the PBMs middleman. They are, but a third party administrator is arguably the same exact type of middleman, and they're taking tons of fees. And I wish that the public understood that whoever owns the PBMs, they're the same company that are the TPA own them too, and they're doing the same thing. They've sort of created a little mafia system where they're like, you want to come into this neighborhood and you have to pay us, right?
Right.
These are our vendors. And so they sign up all the doctors. Now that's their network. And if you want into that network, you have to do business with them. And so if you want to self-fund, you still have to do business with them. And anything you want to opt out of, you got to pay for it. And so it really is like a really lovely sort
It's
of
mafia. We call
is.
the big PBMs the cartel. I mean,
Mhm.
it's no, and why? Because they are making money hand over fist. They make money on every transaction. Even if you think they're not making money, they're making money.
On like literally every transaction. Even like, here's a stupid one, but this is not a PBM, but the Change Healthcare data breach, biggest data breach we've ever had in America. So who owns Change Healthcare? United. So United Health Group owns them. They end up not paying billions of dollars of claims for months because the system's broken. So you know how much money they make just on holding those billions of dollars on the float of holding that money? That alone, they're never going
Couple
to
of
be
shekels.
accountable for. Yeah.
Right.
And so it's just like, even failing, you fail upwards and you make money for your mistakes.
This episode of Broken Healthcare Podcast is brought to you by Benefixa Healthcare Consultants. Visit benefixa.com to learn what's possible. Reduce the cost of healthcare for your organization, deliver better outcomes for your people, and yes, design health plans that give your people a path to $0 out-of-pocket costs for healthcare. Visit benefixa.com today.
Go back to the CAA now mandates that employers must have transparency, right? There can't be gag clauses in contracts, this, that, the other thing. And the CAA was introduced, what was it, December of 21, 19?
It was actually
Was
2020, and it was signed in
2020?
December 2020, but it's the CAA of 2021.
CAA of 2021. And so I know for certainty that I had a large group, but not a very large group, financial services firm that's very visible with about 150 employees on plan. And they were in a fully insured arrangement with United Healthcare. And we requested data. They had a big box broker, not a publicly traded brokerage, but a very, very large, well-known, privately held brokerage. And we asked for data to do an analysis for them. Do you think they gave us data, Julie?
I'm guessing no.
you would be correct. And so a letter went, to us. It was kind of drafted by an attorney, and it went to them, and they came back with a letter of their own, and they basically said, fuck you, we're not giving you the data. and
Yes.
and so do they have legal standing to do that?
Well, the legal stand, this is literally the business model is, I have been told to my face, we're not going to do it no matter what the law says until a court makes us.
Mm,
That's so here's the problem with the law that we have and the system and how it operates in the system that we have. If ERISA is the main vehicle for trying to get these guys to do the right thing, ERISA, most of the penalties fall on the plan, not on the service provider. Although there is a mechanism for that, but it's not widely used enough. Although I'm trying to use it. But also, what ERISA does, there's no punishment element to it. It says,
mm,
let's fix things to how they should have been. So at worst, say you're a large carrier and they tell you, no, we're not giving you data. We're not going to do any of this. The worst thing that will ever happen if it's an ERISA action is that eventually they'll have to give the data. There's not going to be like, you're going to get hit with a fine, these huge punitive damages for your non-cooperation. None of that. And they know that. And so
punitive damages, that's where the money is, folks. We
that's where
want
the
pain and
money
suffering.
is. But it
It
is,
doesn't
but
apply. It doesn't apply.
and it's literally sometimes the only way that corporations or large ones are motivated to do the right thing is the
Right.
fear of a large damage award. There is no such fear here. Now, what can happen is the fear of a lot of litigation undermining the business model. Even worse than that, though, and which is why I've sort of, in the best world, we can avoid litigation. That's better for everyone if we
Yeah.
don't have to litigate. Sometimes there's no choice if people won't be reasonable. And so that's what litigation should be for, is when you all other reasonable measures have failed, then you do that as sort of the nuclear option. But we could do lots of things and not litigate, and we should be doing them. And the
Mm,
main thing we should do is sort of just a little bit of assertiveness, the same way like a company is very serious about, we pay 34 cents for paper clips. So we're not going to sign a contract where we pay 35 because that would be egregious expenditure of an extra cent on the paper clips. And that would be a lot of money. We have to apply those same exacting standards to the contracts that we sign in healthcare and into the negotiations. I can't tell you how many plans have never even tried to negotiate like their administrative service agreement. They're just like, no, this is just how it is. And I've never more seen the we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas approach than I see it in healthcare, because all of the vendors that all these employers rely on and depend on tell them this is how it is. This is the way it works. This is fine. This is what you're
right.
supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so if the people you trust and like tell you that, you sort of feel like you can rely on that. But there's got to be, we're sort of in that weird disconnect. You got to use your eyes. Everything is not fine, you
So
know.
I hope if you're listening to this and you're a CFO or a CEO right about now, you're feeling a little foolish, because if you're not, you should. And I'm coming at you for a reason, not just to be a jerk, but think about it. If you're spending 10, 20, 30 plus $1 million a year on healthcare, and you don't have eyes, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, but you said an independent third party is, you should have that type of oversight. Looking at these contracts, how often do you engage in business where 50 million dollars is at stake, and you don't have an attorney review the contract? My guess is going to be never. And
It's
yet
kind of crazy.
you have these documents. Every year your plan renews. Every year these documents are signed off on. Are you reviewing this stuff, or are you just kind of taking the word of your broker because that's kind of how the game has been played?
Yeah. And, so there's two things you have to do with all of these contracts. One, is you need to have them reviewed legally. Is this opening me to more risk than I need to have? What am I giving away here? What rights am I signing away, which are a lot right now? It's an unbelievable amount of things you're legally entitled to as employers. You routinely contractually sign away in these administrative service agreements and in your PBM agreements, but also just the strategy of negotiating your business. Like, this is how you exist, is negotiating good deals, but somehow it doesn't translate into healthcare. And people think these aren't negotiable, but of course they're negotiable. And there are choices out there, especially for PBMs. So like the
Right.
idea now that you have to use Express Scripts or Caremark or
Optum.
Optum, you don't. And the three of them have 80% of the market share. And just sometimes you really do have to just like look at what your eyes are showing you. These guys get sued, I don't know, 100 times a week. They get sued by individuals, by pharmacists, by companies, by the federal government, by different branches of the federal government, by
Mhm.
chambers of commerce. There's literally nobody that wouldn't sue them except maybe their moms or something. And it's like, what I like about healthcare,
No
though,
mom would sue them.
yeah, maybe. It's like the one area where there's still broad bipartisan agreement, I think,
Yeah.
which is what I love about working in healthcare. Doesn't matter what your politics are, like everyone can be sort of, everyone feels the same. Sort of, why is it like this? And why is it so awful? And how can we fix it? But we have to like do things to fix it. It's not just going to fix itself. And we can pass laws, and I'll talk about the CAA stuff that just got passed, but they're never going to be enough. They're not strong enough. There's loopholes in them. There's lack of enforcement. So we can't just sit around and wait for like a white knight to come save us, because they're not coming. It's us.
No
We're
doubt. And so
saviors.
to give you a little perspective, folks, so I was privileged to be one of the producers of the documentary. It's not personal, it's just healthcare. And in the documentary, Renzo Lozati, who I mentioned earlier, the CEO of USRX Care, is reviewing a PBM contract with, one of the big houses, one of the big shops. And in it, it expressly says that they are not a fiduciary of the plan. And so that is a red flag and a huge smoking gun. And I believe, Julie, it's why you earlier alluded to the fact that if you're in a self-funded plan and you are in an ASO arrangement with an insurance carrier, there are some problems there. And just to give you like a personal example, so since my early 30s, I believe it's hereditary, but I suffer with gout. I have high uric acid. And so the medication that I take is febuxostat. Uloric is kind of the brand name. And if I go in my United Healthcare plan and I try to procure that medication, a 90-day supply is $196. I can go to goodrx.com for free, and I can find a coupon that will get me the same exact medication for $30 to $70 for that same 90-day supply, depending upon when I'm doing the search. But if you're an employer listening, this is a real world example. So if I don't know any better and I'm one of your employees and I go through the plan doing what I think I should be doing, I'm spending 5x minimally what I should be spending for that medication. And there may be some liability on your end in that scenario, as opposed to not having OptumRx be the PBM. You could still have access to a United network or a Cigna network or an Aetna network in many cases, but you're carving out the pharma so that your employee doesn't have to be some mad genius who knows what I know, right? And I'm not saying I'm a mad genius, but I do know what I know. But they basically now have a provider that does name themselves as a fiduciary of your plan and charges them $30 to begin with. How about that?
Yeah. Well, that is just, I like Renzo a lot, and I love that business model. And sort of PBMs are actually changing much faster than the insurance side, than the medical care side, in a positive way. And I
Mm.
think that there's less and less excuses to use one of the big PBMs compared to using a big carrier, because of what you just mentioned, the types of options. So just sort of to quickly go back for a second to fully insured, you might have less risk. You do. You have less risk in a fully insured plan because the insurance carrier is undoubtedly a fiduciary. However, you're still responsible for overall spend. You're still responsible to supervise that carrier. And when you want to get your data, if you ever wanted, say, to focus on population health and actually do something, focus on the quality of your health plan, the revolutionary concept, you'll never be able to get your data in a fully insured plan. And fully
Not
insured
to
plans,
mention the fact that you're going to pay, in
yeah,
my experience, 30 to 60% more in that plan because you have no mechanism to control your claims. And claims is 80 to 85% of your spend. So if
yeah.
you're doing nothing to control your claims, guess what's going to happen to your renewals? You already know they're going up.
And part of the problem is you don't need insurance for like 80%, 90% of the stuff that we go to the doctor for. Insurance is best when it's there because some bad thing happens, right? So for your car, you if someone like walked by your car and wrote "wash me" on the window, right? Because it's dirty, you wouldn't call your insurance. You wouldn't call Geico and be like, "Oh, I'm good. I need to get my car detailed. What's my deductible? I need
We'll call
coverage."
you, Julie. Sue them. Sue them. They scratched the paint. I know they
Y-
did.
You'd suck it up and pay to wash it, right? And,
Yeah.
and like, so we need to think of health insurance the way we think of every other type of insurance is that it sits atop a layer that we can handle that layer. And so by we, when it comes to health plans, it's an employer employee shared function. So definitely in a self-funded plan, you're already ahead of the game cost wise because you can control most of that sort of lower dollar spend, or theoretically you can control most of that. You can steer people to higher quality, higher value, lower cost providers. You can cut things out of your plan that you don't like. All of these things are legal, and it's an antitrust violation to say otherwise. Although if you have a third party administrator giving you access to their network, they'll tell you right to your face, no, there's no tiering, no steering. If you do that, we're going to pull the network discount. No, they have all kinds of anti-competitive clauses that are illegal. And it's like you have to, unfortunately, sue to enforce laws that already exist that they know that they're breaking. But this is the system we have because right now it's been just decades of no one pushes back. And so they'll
Hmm.
just right now they're at maximum sort of, and by they, I mean the third party administrators, the brokers, the PBMs, the people that you're contracting with, your vendors to your health plan will take maximum advantage because they can. And that's just maybe it's human nature in most cases. I don't know, but they know in a cost benefit analysis the likelihood of you doing anything about it lies somewhere between slim and none.
Hmm.
Worst case scenario, maybe you'll fire them. But guess what? They'll have a chance to do your RFP and bid on it. And wait till you see what a better company they can be when they have to compete for your business. So it's like there's part of it is they need to be incentivized to behave better. So that's sort of why I think self-funding just automatically is better than fully insured. You're just never in control. You're paying way more than you should pay, and it increases the cost of the whole system.
And when you're involved early, right, and you give your client the benefit of reviewing contracts, are you successful at redlining contracts and changing language, or is like, oh no, you got to sign it as is, or find another vendor? What in your experience, how often are you successful at getting changes done?
So I will say that it's getting better. It's where we are now compared to where we were in like January 2021.
Yeah.
It's almost like on an entirely different parallel universe because things are that much different. So as much as we're like, oh, everything's terrible, it's way less terrible than it was in some ways, and things are getting better. And one of the things that has happened are there has been a lot of collective change and action since CAA passage, and one of them has been a realization that the RFP process is where sort of employers have a lot of power, right? And so I'm going to talk about contracting too, but these are the two places where if you want change, this is where you, without having to do something negative, without filing a lawsuit or threatening mediation or doing something like that, you can say, we're going to bid on this contract next year. And here's going to be the RFP we want people to answer. And you can put what you want in that RFP. And that's where, so now one of the places where I've seen a lot of shifting of focus and where I encourage a lot of shifting of focus is in designing better RFPs. Because right now, what you see, if you have your broker might be great for some things, but doesn't mean they're great for everything. So say you love your broker and you're convinced they're bringing value to the game and you're definitely not getting rid of them. That's fine, maybe for now, but it doesn't mean that broker needs to also be in charge of the RFP process, especially if you don't understand where your broker gets their compensation from.
Isn't
Because,
that like the fox watching the hen house?
well, it
Would
can
you
be.
really want your broker to be in charge of the RFP process?
I don't want that, but that's how it is right now. That is like
Oh, God.
literally the prevailing business
Folks,
model.
if you're
And
listening, that's a bad idea. Bad,
yeah,
bad, three bads. That's Sicilian. It goes back to my father-in-law, Tony. If he says three bads, three in a row, bad, it's bad, bad, bad. You know
oh,
it's bad.
three
That's
bads.
bad.
Yeah, that's as bad as
Yeah.
it gets.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think what people need to understand are, here's how your broker gets compensated. Okay. Your broker gets compensated directly by you. And you know this is they're either getting a per member per month fee, a per script fee. Sometimes they get paid like an amount for every single prescription that's written on your plan. Sometimes they get an amount on every single overpayment that's recovered. They get paid all kinds of ways. But here's the part that one of the CAA provisions is geared to helping you understand is they get paid indirectly too. So they get paid for things that have to do with your plan, not by you. So that means if they place your plan with a third-party administrator that is one of 3 vendors, those 3 vendors pay them, right? And so those might be the only 3 vendors you're ever getting bids from. And you're like, why is this? Why isn't anyone else bidding? Well, when the person who's in charge of collecting bids knows that they're going to get compensated by a smaller universe of the larger universe, they're going to offer you the smaller universe where they're going to get compensated for it. If you're not getting compensation disclosures, you don't even know this. So you just don't even think, you think you're getting the universe and you're getting just a slice of it, right? So that's the first problem is you have to, one, understand all of the places the compensation is coming from for your broker and for your TPA. For instance, your stop loss carrier is paying someone to get into your plan. You should know who and how much and whether or not that has colored their opinion on that this is a good stop loss carrier. If your stop loss is your biggest cost in a self-funded plan, usually, and it is ever increasing. It feels as if, anytime you need it, it's the thing you need it for becomes not covered or lasered out. It's a very frustrating aspect of self-funding. And part of the reason why is because it's controlled by gatekeepers that are getting compensated to place it. And so stop loss is like,
AKA kickbacks. There are
yes.
kickbacks everywhere. And most brokers are not disclosing everything. They're disclosing the tip of the iceberg, what needs to be reported on a 5500, and good luck with anything else. And even when they tell you they're disclosing everything, odds are they're not disclosing everything.
Well, what you need, I've found, is like sort of an interpreter to go to help you read the disclosure. So say you did get your 408B2 disclosure. And if you all have run 401k plans, you know what this is. It's the fee disclosure. You've been getting them for years from all your 401k vendors. You know you have to do this, right? Well, you're supposed to be getting this from all your health plan vendors too. You're definitely not. You'll never get it from your PBM unless it's Renzo or Capital RX, unless it's the newer sort of transparent pass-through
Fiduciary,
PBMs.
yeah.
You're never going to get that, but they're supposed to. And there's plenty of authority out there. Congress has made it clear in a letter that it's intended to apply to PBM. EBSA themselves, the DOL has issued guidance that says, of course, they're supposed to do it. But anyways, your broker, this is sort of the number one place that this was aimed at, is figuring out who's paying your broker. So you get this disclosure back, and most of you are getting something at this point. And one thing I see all the time is, we also make a certain amount of money in compensations and overrides. However, it goes to our entire book of business, so we can't ascribe any portion of it to your particular plan.
Sounds like a lawyer wrote that, Julie. No
I
offense.
know.
That sounds like some legal language, legal craftsmanship.
That's right. And so if I read it and I'm like, wait a minute, I just read like 400 words that say nothing. Okay.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this is a legalese piece that you need to. So you can't just be like, I got it. I got the document I'm supposed to get. I've complied with the law. That's not what you're doing. That's not the game. The game
Yeah.
is you get the disclosure and you read it. And then you're like, well, what the hell does that mean? Well, and so what we do when we see that is we go back and we're like, oh, well, thank you so much for this disclosure. And, we understand your position that you get some amount in overrides that seem to go to your whole book of business. So why don't you do this? Why don't you, full of actuaries? I know this because we pay you guys for actuary services. Get one of your actuaries to figure out what percentage of our plan is part of your entire book of business. Add up all that compensation overrides you got last year and divide it by our
Did the math.
portion. Yeah. And
Right.
send
Do
us
some
the
basic
math.
math.
Make
Right.
the math. That's what you guys do. And then
Right.
tell us the number. And we get like these incredulous responses like, why are you asking us this? I
Right.
was like, because that's what you're supposed to do, because that's how we have to know. And then
Right.
they're like, no one has ever asked us this. I hear this more than I hear anything else. And I hear it from
Right.
insurance carriers, brokers, PBMs. Nobody ever asks us to do this. And I'm like, well, right, because you tried to not allow this, but this is what we're supposed to ask. This is what all these new laws are telling us we have to do.
Well, there
So
was a
like,
trip to Mallorca on a private jet, and then
yeah,
there was a yacht, and this is not publicly information, publicly available information. How could we possibly calculate the cost?
yeah, that's right. And so that's the problem is how would they do it? And how do they then not become? So this has just bothered me for years. Do you remember Elliot Spitzer?
Of course.
Okay.
So wait, a funny story about the former disgraced governor. So shortly after the scandal, my wife and I are in Italy for maybe the first or second time. And we're staying at this beautiful hotel overlooking Rome. And who walks out but Elliot Spitzer and some beautiful young lady that he was
Well,
with
now we know.
at the time. And so I had met him actually at a Chamber of Commerce event before all of the scandal went down. And I got to tell you, personally, he was awesome. He really very personable guy, very nice guy. I don't know like what blew up and what happened and what transpired, but then seeing him after all of it blew up and seeing him with another young lady was very halfway across the world. It gave us a chuckle, but yes, continue.
Yeah.
Elliot
Okay.
Spitzer.
So unfortunately for all of us, Elliot Spitzer had a weakness and that it brought him down, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
But before the scandal, what he was one of the last examples of this we really have. He was like good government. He was like, I'm seeing some real problems in the market and I'm going to do my job and fix them because otherwise the market doesn't work. And so like, I think everyone needs to remember that if you could we can be capitalists, but if you want capitalism to work, there are still guardrails on it. It's not just unfettered greed. When it is, it doesn't work. That's why we break up
Isn't it
monopolies.
interesting that he went down that road and then look at what happened?
Well,
Is there
what
any
happens-
coincidence there?
So I don't think it's a coincidence that he somehow got brought down in a massive sting right after. So what's interesting is, so now look at some of the biggest brokers in healthcare. You've got Aon, you've got Marsh, you've got Willis Towers Watson. Well, all these guys are brokers, not just in healthcare. Okay. And so when Elliot Spitzer was doing what he was doing, his big interest was in going after brokers for steering people to certain insurance companies in exchange for indirect compensation. And he won all of these huge judgments. And when I say huge, I mean huge. Like, I think Marsh McLennan had to pay a fund to the state of New York, like $700 million. Aon, they paid hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And then this is the weirdest part to me. Part of the settlement agreement with all of them was a promise not to engage in those behaviors for 5 years. So it was like a 5-year moratorium on crime was part of it. And then you could go back. But what they all got in trouble for and what these huge settlements led to and what ultimately led to his downfall, I'm sure, These are all the things that happen in healthcare now that no one bats an eye at. And I'm like, is it still illegal to do this stuff? Isn't this still a violation of our antitrust laws? And this is what everyone has to realize, is that health insurance is a place that lends itself to monopolies and just the concentration of power. And we've seen it happen. We see all this vertical integration where we're down to like 5 companies that own everything. And when that happens, we lose, and we are losing. And you've got huge insurance carrier PBMs. They're the monstrous entities, but then you've got a gob of private equity money, buying up hospitals and other systems and running them into the ground. And then you've got huge hospital systems like, not all hospitals, but the really big ones that are also really predatory in the way they price and do things. And so this is the system that we're operating in. And it's not, so it's hard, and it's really
Yeah.
hard, especially if you're a mid-sized company. Say you have like 100 employees and you just want to get like a decent plan. You want a TPA to help you adjudicate claims. You want access to a reasonable network. And you have all these humongous companies just that exist to suck money out of your plan. That's what they're there for. And so it's very difficult to wade through the sea of sort of vendors and figure out which ones of these do I need? How do I know if I'm getting a return on my investment, and who's taking advantage of me here? And
Yeah.
I advise focusing on the who's taking advantage of me here, because as a fiduciary, that's what you need to eliminate first. And that is what all of these rules are geared at. So,
Yeah, and
that's where I
it
focus.
really does not have to be overly complicated. I think it starts with demanding accountability. Well, actually back up and let's say it starts with just getting involved. That's the first step. So I think any, executive leader that's listening to this has to get involved and, you know, show genuine interest in this top line item expense, P&L expense, and look at it and dive in and say, okay, let me understand, what we're paying. And a good baseline, what I always, train CFOs to understand is dial in the PEPY, the per employee per year cost.
Hmm.
Just start there. And that's simply just taking your annual spend just on healthcare, not dental, vision, any other ancillary benefit, just your medical expense. Divide that by the number of employees that you have on plan, and that will give you your PEPY, your per employee per year cost. Then you have a number that you can measure against the national benchmark by Kaiser Family Foundation, kff.org. Go out there and just see where you are in space. You may think, well, I'm spending 20% below the national average. I must be doing okay. Or I'm spending 40% more than the national average. I really need to take a deeper dive and look at this. That's not the point. The point is then you want to align yourself with an experienced advisor, maybe not someone that's going to be vying for your broker business, but someone who understands the landscape that can help you guide and navigate this. Because to your point, Julie, it can be very twisted and contorted, a lot of twists and turns, and it can get very convoluted, and it's not easy to understand. And by the way, when you look at your spend and you distill your PEPY, that's still not to say that you don't have a broker that's making money hand over fist on the back end in ways that you can't see. And so I think it's important now more than ever that are reminded of your fiduciary responsibility because of the CAA. And I'd like you to speak a little bit to that in terms of who is liable, who is responsible. Can a CEO or a CFO expect a knock on their door saying, yes, we understand that you're the CEO of XYZ Corp, and that there's a corporate veil and blah blah blah, but you're personally liable? Or is that not a thing? Is that nothing for them to sweat or lose sleep over? But getting back to point, it's important for them to understand what they're spending and to be able to break down the supply chain and say and silo each of these expenses out and manage it just like they would any other product that they procure, the more dialed in they are in that way, in my view, the more solid footing they're on. If they're paying one vendor and they're just hoping to set it and forget it, that's where they're really going to get into some hot water. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so my first thought is everything you just said. I agree with you. That's all right. And, and that's just all of it is the last thing I'd add to that is once you know sort of all of the costs and you've siloed everything, you need to be able to do benchmarking and compare it to what other people are paying, which you sort of mentioned earlier. And this is, you just pretend it's like everything else because it is. And so we've taken this thing that we procure and that every business in the country procures, and we've made it different than everything else that we procure, but it isn't. It doesn't have to be. And so our goal is to dumb it back down. And that sort of, this is what we need to do is, and by dumb it down, I don't mean make it dumb. I mean, make it so that it's not so complicated that I need to go get a PhD to understand, something I just read. And I do this all day. I am a lawyer steeped in healthcare contracts all day. And I can't tell you how many times a week I read something and I'm like, what the hell does this even say? I'm like, I don't understand.
Right.
And it's like shocking. And it's still this is the problem. It's an industry where at least once a week, I am like clutching my pearls when I find out some new business practice and I have to like take to the fainting couch because I didn't know this thing. And, this is even worse than I thought. And it's just, we need to like take back control. So so back to your overall question, you're a fiduciary. If you're the CFO, you're probably going to be named in any lawsuit that gets filed against your company individually, because all 3 suits filed so far against plans name the CFO. And if you sign the 5500, you're definitely getting named. So who's a fiduciary? In ERISA. And I assume most people listening are in ERISA governed plans. The rules are mainly the same also for non-ERISA, although there's some nuances depending on how the plan language is. But everyone's a fiduciary. There are fiduciaries in almost all of these plans. So first of all, you're a fiduciary if you're a named fiduciary. Most plans have to name a fiduciary, and they might name the employer itself, which is not great because then everyone on the executive committee is going to get named, and a bunch of Does are going to get named. John Doe 1, Jane Doe 1 through 20 until they can figure it out. Anyone who signs the 5500 will get named. But ERISA has a second fiduciary. You don't just have to be called a fiduciary. And that's why, a health insurance carrier might say they're not a fiduciary in a contract, but a lot of times we sue them and say, no, you are a fiduciary for this and you blew your fiduciary duty. You're a fiduciary if you are performing as a fiduciary. So if you've been delegated authority and you're able to make decisions about the administration or management of the plan, you have discretion to do that, or you have control of plan assets, you don't even have to have discretion. If you're able to control plan assets, you're a fiduciary, whether you want it to be or not. And so a lot of times people don't know they're fiduciaries. And it's especially shocking for members of an HR team to find out, hey, I'm just like doing what I'm being told is my job. And now I'm going to be named in a lawsuit for this. So the first thing you do to sort of take control of this and minimize risk, every company, the goal here is minimize risk and also control the spend and increase the value for what you're spending. So the first way you minimize your risk is you create a committee of people that expressly have fiduciary authority. And then when you buy your fiduciary liability policy, or you expand it to make sure it covers your health plan too, not just your 401k, you make sure they're named individually and that there's a catch-all to cover anyone else that you might allow to exercise fiduciary duty on your plan's behalf. And that's as your employee. So, and you can even cover a consultant if you wanted to. But one thing that we're seeing happen, which I think is good, are a lot of these 316 sort of fiduciaries from the 401k side are trying to retool themselves now because they see the writing on the wall too, and they understand the fiduciary process. So that's great. They can learn the subject matter. We can all learn new subject matters. And so having an independent fiduciary on your team, especially to begin, if you don't feel really confident about sort of what we're supposed to be doing, that's sort of a good way to start. There's also products out there Fiduciary in a Box is one of, there's all kinds of ways where if you don't know where you're supposed to start, it's not as I don't mean to make it seem overwhelming, and neither do you, because you just have to start. All you do is start. And so start by making a committee. You get a charter. This is what we're doing. You name the people, you get some insurance, and You're in business, right? So then what are you doing as fiduciaries? You're making sure that you vet all the contracts, vet all the vendors, and then you're reviewing them, making sure you're getting value for your money, that these are good contracts, that you're benchmarking them and that they're competitive. Same thing you do with everything else in the business. And so this is what guides all your future meetings is now it's time to discuss next year's, what are we doing for our administrative agreement? Are we going to stick with who we're using now? Do we want an RFP? This is where we were talking earlier. The RFP process is a place where you can do great innovation because this is where people actually are competing for your business. It's one of the only times where they actually care about your business. Once you're in, you're sort of stuck. And so here's where you need to redesign the traditional RFPs and RFIs you've been doing and don't just allow these general questions. Specifically say, so for instance, if you want a compensation disclosure and you're concerned that you're not getting it, make it be an attachment to the RFP and don't respond unless you're going to attach your compensation disclosure because that's how you can start to know these things. And people want your business and they will respond. It's very rare that you design an RFP so restrictive that nobody responds. If you do, then obviously you need to rethink it. But in most cases, it's helpful because some people will weed themselves out. And if they weeded themselves out because they didn't want to disclose something that you want to know, you don't want to have those people as your business partners. So this is a good process. It's a culling. This is what you're supposed to do.
For sure. And I think, if you're an employer and you're listening to this, like, oh, this is another expense. It's another process. It's another item on the to-do list that, is not the primary focus of our business. I would, suggest that going through this exercise and doing this properly will save your organization so much money. It will more than offset the expense of the exercise and the added, bonus of greatly reducing your liability and your exposure is well worth the price of admission because, Julie, it's the DOL that comes knocking, right? I mean, I think they're kind of the enforcers when it comes to violating this. Is that right?
They are. That's right. And, the penalty, whether it's fair or not, whether any of this is fair or not, you do have added responsibilities and they come knocking on your door, not your vendor's door when your vendor didn't do it right. It's you that's responsible. And so so again, back to that sort of fiduciary process, the more you know this from 401k work, the more you can show that you are a prudent fiduciary and you exercise the two duties of a fiduciary, prudence and loyalty, the more you're inoculating yourself from this risk because you don't have to be right under ERISA. You don't have to make the correct decision as a fiduciary all the time. We all make mistakes. What you have to do is employ prudence and loyalty in the decision-making process. And so the loyalty part is cutting out the conflicts that exist in your plan now. Figuring out my broker is getting paid on both sides of this transaction. That's probably not in the best interest of my plan. I have to make a change. You have to act on these things when you find them. Also, sort of something we all do because it's part of what we think is the business model. You are paying somebody right now who administers your plan and makes mistakes to fix their mistakes and recover the money that they overpaid. In what other universe do you pay people to fix their own mistakes? You don't. And it's one thing to pay for, instances of fraud that they uncover, through diligence. But that's not what's happening in overpayment recovery. They're finding things that they didn't do pre-adjudication. And this is most oftentimes a choice at this point. What are you paying? This is what we all have to just sort of think about. What is the per employee per month fee cover? What are you paying for when you're paying a third party administrator to adjudicate claims? Are they supposed to do it right? Is that part of what you pay for, or is that not? Because I personally believe, of course it is. You're not paying them just to rubber stamp things and then go back and for an additional fee, fix it. You're paying them to do it right in the first place. And this is just sort of this untenable conflict now because this third party administrator, who might also be a fiduciary to your plan for claims, also has all these contracts with the hospitals at say different things than their contract with you. So I think a great example of this is Aetna. So say Aetna is your TPA, and I'm sorry, Aetna, but this is, you talk about it publicly. So I think it's okay to, to put you in the spotlight here. They'll say that they have agreements with hospitals where they won't look at claims prepayment, and they have a lot of them. And so okay, so do I get a discount on all those claims since you're just rubber stamping them all in the front end? Why am I paying you for the, like, what, first of all, what am I even paying for there? Am I just paying for access to what may or may not be a discount? But then a double whammy on that is, are you going back and taking a recovery fee afterwards if you intentionally didn't review it in the first instance? Are you now doing sort of overpayment recovery? That is just not okay. It's in that you just like a lot of what happens in healthcare, if you just stop listening to the people telling you how complicated it is and just think about what is happening. If this happened in any other aspect of your life, you'd be like, you are stealing from me. I am not doing this. And that's the same. All of these really smart people have to like employ their common sense and be like, this is doesn't make any sense to me. I'm
So
not doing
Aetna
this.
was named in the lawsuit by Heinz, is that right?
They're named in a lawsuit by Heinz, by Aramark, by
But the one by
WW
Heinz
Granger.
specifically was settled out of court, I believe, right?
It was, and it just
Yeah.
recently, well, actually, it didn't settle. They ended up going and they're in mediation now instead of court. So that's good for both of them because Kraft will recover a bunch of money and we'll never find out about it because what happens in mediation and arbitration is private. So
So
that's
my soundbite on LinkedIn when I heard about this lawsuit was there is no universe in which this case does not get settled outside of court. There's just
yeah.
no way.
They
They
try
can't
to
they can't afford it.
There's a lot of claims like this pending, and what has happened so far is a lot of them are stuck in that briefing motion to dismiss. This is where insurance carriers put all of their bulk in the motion to dismiss stage because that's where they have the most success. Courts don't love they love ERISA as much as everyone else. And so if they can get rid of the case, they do, right? And so they're
Yeah.
always looking for sort of fancy pants standing grounds to get rid of it that have nothing to do with the issues. But there are cases pending against Aetna, like 4 of them, and they're all brought by the same firm that brought the Kraft Heinz case. There are several cases pending against Anthem, one that I represent plaintiffs for, which are 2 different union plans. And that's in Connecticut. Has been pending now since December 2022. And that is sort of square one. Give us our claims data. And also, hey, the data we do have suggests that you're not paying claims. They don't match hospital prices, which has been another sort of new bonus for employers to be able to look at is you
You
can
still
look
can't
at
get claims from December 2022? You're still not there?
this is a oddity though, because it's in litigation, this has turned into just a sort of bullheaded, like no one's giving anything now until someone's forced to do it. In most cases, you can get your data now if you're a self-funded plan. And like, I mean, I could, you know, maybe it's also I've developed sort of like, oh, it's this pain in the ass again. Just give it to her, and it's sort of once you do it
You're
once, they're
getting a
gonna be
rep.
like, yeah. And so I don't
Her
mind.
again.
My mother
Right.
always told me I was a big pain in the ass, and I knew it'd come in handy someday.
Hey,
But
listen,
there's other cases.
that's your job, right? Your
Yeah,
job is to be paranoid for your clients and to defend them fiercely. And I get the sense that you're pretty good at that.
thank you. But also, if you're a plan, I do feel for you guys. If your employers or your unions, you're trying to do something that our society, whether you agree with it or not, American society has decided employers are the way we should be providing healthcare is the main healthcare provision system in this country. It's weird. It's different. No other country does it like this, but this is what we're doing, guys, whether it's fair or not. And so what I hear a lot from employers that don't want to really do this, you'll hear from, especially for the CFO, why do I have to be there? I don't even understand why I'm a fiduciary. We pay for most of this. And I get that. I understand it's super expensive for you. And so it already feels like, oh, aren't we doing enough just by paying this huge burden after payroll? But your employees are paying for it too. They're getting a lot of money taken out of their paycheck every 2 weeks. Like if you look at the insurance cost for a family of 4, it's like buying like a car every year. It's like 20, it's a lot of money, especially if you make under like $150,000 a year, paying $26,000 a year in the hopes that you'll be covered when something happens. That's a lot of money. And so it is breeding a lot of unhappy sentiment in return, particularly as denials increase, pre-authorization denials increase, costs at the point of service increase. It's not working. So we have to make it work better. But there's a study that just came out that employers should be aware of. General Accountability Office just compared employer-sponsored plans to marketplace plans. And this is really crazy because marketplace plans are more expensive because they're fully insured, but the employee out of pocket is higher in employer sponsored plans. So there's obviously, this is an area where both the employer and the employee are being taken advantage of, and their money is not being used wisely. The employer has the control. You have more control over this. And part of it is also helping your employees have control by providing them with tools to let them comparison shop and things like that. This assumption that like employees won't participate and won't, sort of bargain shop and comparison shop, that's just not true. And it doesn't bear out. Americans love to find a good discount. They love to, my doctor's the best doctor in the world and he only charges, but this is like, people
Right.
do this with everything. They just need
Except
the tools.
healthcare.
Yeah.
Right? People will be on Amazon all day, every day, looking for whatever, a vacuum cleaner, a barbecue grill, you name it, right? Anything. It could be a $10 item, and they're on Google searching for the best deal. When it comes to healthcare, they don't give a rat's ass about getting the MRI that was prescribed in the big healthcare system that's going to cost $5,000 versus one down the street that's going to cost 500, because they're not incented, and they
They also
don't
don't know.
they don't know any better. They just don't know. And so this is where kind of the culpability comes in. And as an employer, if you can steer a member, an employee, down the block to a major diagnostic exam that's literally 1/10 the price, you're saving your plan a boatload of money. And when plans are designed properly, you can actually have that exam done for free, for no out-of-pocket cost to the member or the employee. That gives them skin in the game and incents them to go to the place where the technology is just the same. The radiologist is every bit as good. And by the way, they have AI now that's reading, these scans with a higher degree of accuracy than humans as an enhancement. Human still should be involved. But the reality is, with technology getting better, don't be fooled by the fact that you have to get that, CT scan done at Hospital for Special Surgery or Sloan or Cedars-Sinai, or pick a flavor, because it's going to be better there. That's just a bunch of horseshit. The
Totally.
reality, yeah, it's nonsense. And so this is the stuff that's going on inside of your plan when left, kind of on autopilot, as most of you, are kind of doing right now. This is a game changer, though. That was then, this is now, and now you have to protect yourself. You're chomping at the bit, Julie. What do you want to say?
I am. I'm so excited. I love this topic. So like, this to me is like win-win all the way around. So put aside minimizing your risk and minimizing your liability. We've talked about that somewhat and scattered around, but we know you want to do that. But you also want to save money. And if possible, you want an issue that make your employees happy. And any issue where employees and employers can be on the same side of something, and it could actually become a recruitment and retention tool, as you've meant it to be all this time. So what you were just talking about, if you just give people the tools that they need, they will shop. We do that. It's like, I don't know anyone that's, except for maybe my mom, who's like, no, I have to go to the dealership to get my car fixed. That's the only place they'll do it. Right. And it costs like 10 times as much. That's the same thing as going to the super expensive hospital system that you're told to go to by your provider that works at that hospital system that's owned by your insurance carrier.
What's wrong
You
with a
don't wanna
$600
choose.
oil change? I don't understand.
I know, right? But now you can like provide your employees with a tool that shows them, if you go here, the MRI will cost $50. If you go here, it'll cost $400. If you go here, it'll cost $3,600. And guess what? If you go to that first place, you will have no copayment. And we'll waive it and it'll be free. This is the point of a self-funded plan. And this is what we've forgotten, sort of. A lot of people have turned to self-funding, but then forget that you're allowed, the point of it is now design a good plan. You don't just have to take some off the shelf, and you shouldn't take some off the shelf ASO plan that you didn't put some sort of, you need to sort of be in the moment and think about it and like carve out things that don't make sense. Steer people. Advanced primary care. Like, this is such a huge money saver
Game
for so
changer.
many. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have value and quality are better than quantity. And so moving towards any sort of health delivery system that focuses on delivering value versus fee for service means you have to give more things to make money. This is the way to go. So advanced primary care, you've got physicians, your employees and your members of your health plan can go to the doctor whenever they want, and they're encouraged to go and to be in regular contact. You have a doctor spending more than like 30 seconds at a time with them. Maybe they even actually see the real doctor and not just, not I love the PAs and the nurse practitioners in my practice, but I don't even remember what my doctor looks like. But if you go to primary care, you can go as much as you want. They coordinate your care. There's focus on prevention. There's the ROI
Never
on.
mind, Julie. Good luck getting an appointment. I'm in New
Yeah,
York
I know,
City.
right?
I try to get an appointment with my direct primary care, with my primary care provider, excuse me. It's 6 months out to get an appointment. And we have the privilege of paying, I don't know, 50 grand for an insurance policy. And it takes us a half a year to see someone. Come on.
Right. So isn't
Like,
it funny?
really?
Like everyone was so worried. The big worry you always hear why no one ever wants government health care is rationing. You'll have care rationing. And
Yeah.
I get it. But what do you think we have now? And so there's always going to be care rationing. The question is who's doing it and what's the motive?
Well,
And
and getting back to what you said earlier, with the insurance piece of it. So, so stop loss is not the most important, not the most expensive part of your coverage claims, and then stop loss, right?
yes, yes, yes,
In
yes.
terms of the fixed cost, stop loss for sure
Hmm.
is the big cost driver. But if you have a plan in which claims are left unchecked, unmanaged, you're in an ASO arrangement, and the insurance carrier is auto adjudicating claims, which is the same thing as blindly paying a credit card bill, essentially, right? They're just paying claims without even scrutinizing them, looking at them. This is no way to manage money, folks, right? It's just not. It doesn't make good fiscal sense. But when you start dialing in and you get to the care level, let's remember what the purpose of insurance is. The purpose of insurance is to protect us against catastrophic financial loss, right? From a sudden and unexpected event. And we've gone from that kind of premise to a land now where we're treating our healthcare like a Pez dispenser. Like, it's just like, oh, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor and my insurance policy will cover it. No, I'm going to go to the doctor again and my insurance policy will cover it. But that's why we're in the mess that we're in, right? Because no one is managing this, and the concept of insurance has gotten lost. It shouldn't be that you have to pay, like in New York. If you want the best coverage, the quote unquote best coverage, you want a platinum plan on the exchange, and you have a family, you can pay over $70,000 a year for the privilege of having that plan,
It's
which is
insane.
utterly ridiculous. If you have a plan
Hmm.
like that, two things: you're stupid, and you should be ashamed because there's no reason for that at all. But yet people enroll in coverage like that. But why? Like, the idea should be, if God forbid something happens, I want to know that I have underlying financial protection. I don't want to lose my house. I don't want to lose my assets. I don't want to declare bankruptcy. As we know, bankruptcy is the number one cause for bankruptcy is medical debt. And we have over
Hmm.
100 million people, nearly a third of our fellow citizens, that are carrying some form of medical debt, which is insane and outlandish. But we've gotten away from we've kind of lost all sense of sense. Like, it's ridiculous. And so as an employer, you need to ask yourself, am I looking at this? Do I have eyes on it? Am I scrutinizing it? And if you're not, if you're just relying blindly on a broker or an insurance carrier, you really ought to rethink that. And when folks think of you, Julie, like, when should you pop into their mind? Because I don't think the appropriate time to engage your services is after, God forbid, an employee sues or something else pops up where they're in a position of being culpable. What is the best practice for an employer or an organization to forge a relationship with you? Does it need to break the bank and be cost prohibitive? We have folks that maybe are, small business owners all the way on up to enterprise folks that are tuning in. When is it appropriate to, engage the services of Berger Montague and reach out to you? And how do folks find you?
So, first of all, you can just go on our website, and I'm Jay Selesnick at burgermontague.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and it's not just me. So, a lot of times you don't even need a lawyer. Okay. So, let me just talk myself out of some business here. But what you need is somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to the specific issue you have. So, I'm not always the right person to call for every issue either. Like, there's health care, as we've talked about, is complicated, it's sprawling, and different areas unfortunately require different areas of expertise. So one thing that so my practice has really changed over the past few years, and I do a lot of consulting now, which I love, and I work with plans and with some vendors, sort of trying to prevent problems and trying to help. And what I love, my favorite thing to do, is help plans sort of actually create the self-funded plan that they would like to see in action, and problem solve their way through it, because none of these problems are unsolvable. We have to just do new things, and people just aren't comfortable trying things. But and the big fear, you said it earlier, people are driven by fear when it comes to healthcare, and I get it. It is scary, and part of the reason it's so scary is because if you're an individual, you don't know what anything's ever going to cost, and if this next thing could bankrupt you. That's a scary feeling. This is part of the problem, and what that we have to address is, because everything's so opaque, it's unclear if, like, oh my gosh, I have, this weird little thing. Is it going to cost me my deductible, or is it going to cost me my house? And we can't have a system like that. And and for employers, they're like, oh, if I push back even this much against something that I know is patently unreasonable, they're going to take the discount away. They're going to fire me, basically, and my employees are going to have nowhere to go to the doctor. And that's just not the case in most parts of the country. There are a few places in the country where that can still be really difficult to go against sort of the monopolizing entity in the region. But in most
Few
places,
and
there
far
are
between.
choices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really the exception, not the rule.
And now there are all these state laws being passed where you're a self-funded plan and you're exempt from state law. But guess what? Your vendors aren't. And so you need to use these state laws to hold them accountable. And things like, if a carrier is telling you, for instance, no, you can't steer your employees towards certain providers. We don't allow that. It's all or nothing. Our whole network has to be treated the same. Well, there are several states now with laws that say absolutely not. Of course you can. And that would be a violation of any contract if an insurance carrier or a healthcare provider required that. So they have to follow those laws. This is something that plans get told all the time. No, ERISA preempts this. It preempts it for you. This is where we have a lot of power as self-funded plans. You are exempt from state law. Your vendors aren't. Use it. You can report them. Be a tattletale to the Department of Insurance. They don't like that. They don't like being regulated by state departments of insurance, who have less and less to do these days because most people are self-funded. Report them. There's a lot of behaviors that happen because nobody does anything about it. And so just sort of, doing so but back to what you asked me, which is, what do you do if someone needs? So if you, first of all, want to make a change, that's the best time to call me or anyone. And it could be that I'm the right person for you. It could be that you tell me the specific thing that you're having a problem with, and I'm like, you know what? I know someone who's really good about this and they can help you with this. If for larger companies, a lot of times I'll work with their in-house counsel or their existing ERISA attorneys just to work on sort of some of these nuanced healthcare issues that are sort of on the newer front that a lot of lawyers really aren't into yet. You got a lot of ERISA compliance lawyers out there, but they're not necessarily, they haven't pivoted into sort of how to do things in healthcare. So they understand fiduciary compliance, but they don't understand some of the cost drivers and the other aspects. It's a more sort of nuanced type of practice. So you can work with other lawyers and then just sort of have a limited role and back out. Sometimes they come in just to negotiate a contract, just to be on the phone for a call. So sometimes I get engaged for like a 20-minute thing. And that's fine, because if that's all you need,
You're
that's
the hired
great.
muscle.
Yeah. And that's sometimes, and your vendor just needs to see that you care enough that you went and hired a lawyer, because a lot of times they won't take you seriously. You can send a letter, you can write an email, you can send it 5 times. One letter on legal letterhead, and you get a call back instantly because they're afraid of getting sued. So it's not fair and it's not right. But a lot of times, just bringing in a lawyer for show or to have on a call with you can so a lot of what I do a lot, this is where people call me a lot, is they're having trouble onboarding a vendor they chose. So they want the company A to review their data, or they want company B to be in charge to do sort of medical management of chronic disease in their plan. Something that there's been some thought into, intentionality, and the plan is trying to assert itself. And you have one of either the PBM, the TPA, or the broker, one of the gatekeepers is saying, no, this violates something. So I'll come in then to negotiate access, because of course you have the freedom to contract with who you want to. And of course you can hire the vendors of your choice. And yes, a third-party administrator has to share your claims data with your business associate of your choosing, as long as they sign a confidentiality agreement like you. They don't. You have to stop letting the terms be dictated to you. So that's where I find I can be the most helpful, is in negotiating contracts before they're signed, negotiating the onboarding of vendors that help with cost containment or that sort of carve up the plan, and with plan design. Sort of like, if you don't like this, let's design a different type of health plan, where maybe you have a medical expense reimbursement plan that sits next to your cafeteria plan, so that you have this whole swath of claims that never goes through a network, never goes to a TPA. You're paying cash. Maybe you direct contract with some, advanced primary care. You direct contract with Green Imaging for all your MRI stuff. You direct contract with some back and knee place to do all your knee surgeries. These are all things that plans can do. And, not every plan, if you're like a 100-person plan, you're not going to be doing all of this. But if you're a larger plan, it's in your benefit to start doing these things. And plan design can help even the smallest plan sort of avoid, so there could be instances, for example, where you don't want your employees to go to a certain hospital or be covered at a hospital. And if they go there, you don't want to cover them. It doesn't mean you won't reimburse them, though, if they go in as a self-insured person and they're able to get a price that is significantly lower than what you would have had to pay if it was covered under your network plan. You can have a medical expense reimbursement plan that reimburses them for those costs. So there are all kinds of creative ways to lower your costs and redesign your plans. That's where it's the most useful to get help.
You're thinking outside the box. I love it. And that's really what any, that's why there is a board of directors. That's why that's where CFOs and CEOs make the big bucks. It's thinking outside the box. It's not doing what everybody else is doing. It's not doing what all of your competitors are doing. And to your point, it is creating a competitive advantage. When it's done right, it does aid with recruiting. It does help with retention. So all of those things factor in. And it's not rocket science, right? We're not pretending to be Elon Musk here. We're not trying to colonize Mars. It's very basic stuff, but you have to get involved in, and you have to pay attention. And I believe, Julie, you mentioned that there are some documents that you'd be willing to share with our audience that we could include in the show notes. Give us an idea some of the things that you could share that might be helpful.
Sure. So I do like to give away free stuff when I can. And so I have some templates, for instance, claims data request letter, request demand, whatever, wherever we are in the process, but a letter you can use and tailor to your own needs that just tells your TPA, I need my data, give it to me, and so I'm happy to share that. I'm also, so another thing that has sort of been anathema for employers has been this attestation requirement for gag clause removal. And you're like, what do I do? Do I just sign it? Is it true? Am I lying? What am I doing? And now every year you're getting this statement from your TPA that says you can rely on this to file your attestation. And then the statement says something that has nothing to do with what you're attesting to. So it'll say, we comply with Section 201 of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, in that we don't get those types of clauses in our contracts with providers. And that's good. As insurance carriers, they're required to do that. However, what you're attesting to as a plan is that there are no gag clauses in your contract with them, the carrier. Not about what's in their contracts with providers. So one way to, instead of trying to find, what we found the easiest is I will provide anyone with a sort of email or one paragraph letter response that says, gee, thank you so much for providing that statement. We assume that you also meant to cover our contract, the contract between your company and my company. Assuming we're correct, we'll go ahead and file the attestation. If not, please let us know in writing by blank date. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to write back, oh, no, there's plenty of gag clauses there. So then you've covered yourself. You've limited your liability because they've confirmed by not responding that they did mean to include it. And you can attest, which is sort of a form over substance thing, the attestation anyways. You just want to do it and not be in a position where you didn't do it truthfully. Another thing I'm happy to provide is some language that plans can, instead of trying to negotiate the gag clauses out, I spent like 2 years doing this and it's not going to work. You're not going to get rid of audit provisions. It's not happening because, and I get it. They're okay in some circumstances. No one's going to let you come on site and audit every single claim. That would take forever. So what you need to really do is just carve out the access to de-identified claims data from all the gag clauses and say, so I have some language that I'll share that you can, and I've never yet had a carrier say no to adding it to an administrative service agreement that just says, notwithstanding any of the provisions, these audit provisions or any other provision of this contract, none of this will interfere with the plan's ability to access de-identified data upon request and all the things that it says in the gag clause prohibition statement, and including down to like each element of a claim or encounter and bill charges, allowed amounts, blah 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 upon
That's huge.
request.
That's huge,
Yeah,
and I'll tell you why. Because let's suppose that you don't go down the road of engaging a healthcare consultant. Let's suppose that you are, you want to do an RFP, or you just simply want to shop the market and you want to have some other brokers explore options for you. A game that's always played, is a broker, the incumbent broker, will sit on a renewal and sit on data until the 11th hour because they know the clock is ticking. And so with every day, with every week that passes that they're not giving the data over, it's buying them time and strengthening and solidifying all likelihood that you're going to renew with them, because you're out of time. You basically, your hands are tied. And so in doing this proactively, and I love that you're willing to share this with the audience, Julie, you're basically fast forwarding. You're saying, nope, the provision is there. We need our data. And with that, you're going to have the upper hand when it comes to having other brokers compete for your business.
you're right. And then in a perfect world, once you have that in, once your plan is operational and this administrative service agreement is live, I'm sorry, no, I don't care what size your plan is. You have to have a vendor now in this year 2024 going forward that is reviewing some portion of your data periodically to make sure claims are being paid properly. So that's good because one, they'll find mistakes and you will get that money back. And so that's good for your plan. It will pay for itself. That is definitely just, I've never seen it not pay for itself. But also good is that you can then establish ongoing data feeds. So that's something else you negotiate up front. We want, depending on the size of your plan, weekly, every 2 weeks, monthly data feeds where you're just going to give us this sort of, you're going to transfer it to this site, we'll have it, or you give us an electronic I don't know what it's called, some weird thing that's beyond my data capabilities, but however you transfer it, you do it on a regular basis. So then you're never in the position where you have to wait for your broker to give you something, because what you just said is so true. They'll sit on it until you don't have a chance to renew. And if you find that that's happening and you don't know why you can't get it from your broker, you should assume it's because they don't want you to switch. And so that should be a red flag. That's huge, like red flag right there, that behavior. But the
Smoking
more
gun
you
for
get
sure.
access to everything and have your own ability to access any of these things at any time, the less you need to rely on your broker.
100%. Julie, you have been a breath of fresh air. You really kind of pull back the curtain and I think open the eyes of a lot of our folks to just the fact that, hey, you do have to inspect what you expect. And thank you for sharing that stuff. For folks that are listening, you could visit our YouTube channel at Broken Healthcare Podcast. We'll include links in the show notes. I'm not sure if we can throw it out there on Spotify and Apple. If we can, we will, but certainly on YouTube, go out there and find those links. And do like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed our conversation today. We have a lineup of guests coming up. It's amazing. It's a crazy time in healthcare. And whether you're a broker, you're an advisor trying to up your game, whether you're someone that is on the buyer side and you sit in the C-suite, or you're in HR trying to get a handle on this, or whether you're just a regular person that's fed up with what's going on because you're seeing your paycheck deteriorate and your health insurance and your health care costs go up, there's a place for you here. So we appreciate you being here. And until next time, folks, peace and love always. Take care.
So that's it for today's episode of Broken Healthcare. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show and join us on the next episode.